I have two impressive panelists today. I'd like to start with Gregory Donovan. Gregory, do you go by Gregory? Okay. Gregory Donovan is an associate professor in the Department of Communication and Media Studies and an affiliate faculty in the Urban Studies Design and Technology programs at Fordham University. Welcome from New York City. I'm glad you arrived here. He received his PhD in environmental psychology from the City of New York Graduate Center and is the author of Canaries in the Data Mine, Understanding the Proprietary Design of Youth Environments, and is a principal investigator of the Initiative on Migrants, Migration, and Human Dignity. Donovan's research broadly explores the mutual shaping of people, place, and technology, and how to reorient such shaping toward a more just and meaningful publics. His current research situates migrant accompaniment as a site of social reproduction and considers how non-hierarchical practices of care and maintenance challenge the logics of surveillance and control that cyberstalk people in migration. Thank you, Gregory, for being here. And next, I'd like to introduce Monica Ruiz. I've known Monica for many years now. She does incredible work as the executive director of Casa San José, which was founded in 2013 by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Baden, right here in Pittsburgh, and supports and advocates for and with the Latino community in Western Pennsylvania. Monica received the 2019 Women of Influence Award from the Pittsburgh Business Times and the 2019 Cesar Chavez Community Heroes Award. She currently sits on numerous nonprofit boards and committees and has served on transition teams for Allegheny County Executive Sarah Inamorato and Pittsburgh Mayor Ed Gainey. Ruiz earned a bachelor's degree in social work with a concentration in psychology and a master's degree in social work from the University of Pittsburgh. So welcome to both of you. I'm really pleased to be able to talk about the description of our panel, which is Dignity and the Dangers of AI, Surveillance, Immigration, and Faith. Just to offer the audience a little bit of a description of this talk, artificial intelligence, as we all know, is becoming increasingly embedded in the systems of governance, security, and social services. Vulnerable and marginalized communities often feel its impact first and most intensely. This panel explores the ethical, the spiritual, and human dimensions of AI-driven surveillance in the context of immigration enforcement and border control. And drawing on the perspectives of, from theology, ethics, law, technology studies, and lived experience, our panelists will examine how algorithmic decision-making, biometric monitoring, and predictive analytics shape perceptions of human worth and belonging, if you can believe that. What happens to dignity when one's movements, relationships, and identity are continuously tracked? How do faith, traditions speak to the moral obligations that we hold towards those rendered as data points in systems designed to categorize and control? And what possibilities exist for resistance, solidarity, and policy reform that places human flourishing at its center? So through dialogue and audience engagement, I hope we have some rich questions from you at the end. This conversation seeks not only to illuminate the dangers of uncritical technological adoption, but also to imagine the frameworks of care, hospitality, and justice that honor the sacredness of each person in the age of AI. So I hope that gives a little bit of an overview of what we'll be covering today. I'd like to go ahead and start with Gregory. Gregory, please tell us more about Fordham University's initiative on migrants, migration, and human dignity, when it was founded, and tell us about it, because I think it's one of those few centers in the country that's really dedicated to this topic.
Thank you. And thank you for that introduction and for having me here. So this initiative on migrants, migration, and human dignity, which is based at Fordham University, we operate with funding from the Cummings Foundation, which is a nonprofit based in Massachusetts. It started with 3 of my colleagues back in 2023, I believe. They got like a 2-year funding for a pilot to see if they could like do proof of concept, figure out a way to take the concept of migration justice, the practice of migrant accompaniment, and try and connect it with research, teaching, and service. At the end of that 2-year period, not only did I enlist in this project, but so did a few other faculty, so there were 7 of us total. Myself in communication and media studies, 2 colleagues from theology, 2 colleagues from political science, 1 colleague from languages and culture, and 1 colleague from natural sciences. And the 7 of us went back to the Cummings Foundation and applied for more money, and we got a 3-year, very well-funded grant that allows us to not only create a whole range of internships for both undergrads and graduate students that are fully paid, and places them both in migrant-serving organizations in New York City, but also brings students and faculty down to the southern border, both in places like Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Mexico, and both provides long-term internships there for students, but also allows faculty to meet with different organizations, meet with different populations, and actually build research agendas that meet their needs, rather than some kind of question that we're thinking about in the ivory tower. I mentioned accompaniment earlier, and just to provide some kind of general definition for that, the best way to think about accompaniment in the broadest term is a kind of lateral organizing, right? A practice about bearing witness, about being with someone else on their journey. I did some basic training in legal accompaniment at Villanova University. That idea is you're not the lawyer directly that's going to be representing this person, but you're going to be with them through the legal process, and you have all kinds of legal knowledge that you can support. If you actually become a licensed legal to do legal accompaniment, then you can, under the supervision of like a law firm or a lawyer, help someone represent themselves, which is not something that just a random person can do. So accompaniment can be legal, it can be about helping people connect with social services, it can be about spiritual development. It's really a non-hierarchical practice in which expertise isn't rooted in one end, but throughout the relationship on both ends. It talks a lot about mutuality. And so that's a practice we make sure that all our internships, classes that we're developing, which are community engaged, but also the research that we're doing is always participatory and community driven, to ensure that it fits within this accompaniment model of being with people instead of like controlling or managing or studying them. And then just the 2 other things I'll point out is, underneath that umbrella, my own work, which I'll be speaking a lot about today, has been an assessment of 12 different organizations, both at the southern border and in New York City, that I've been working with, 22 people that we've done in-depth interviews with from those organizations during the last year of the Biden administration and the first year of the Trump administration, and trying to assess all the shifts in accompaniment practices, both in places like Arizona and in places like New York City, and the way they're having to adapt to accompany people who are now living in a fundamentally different country than they were prior to January 2025. And the last plug I'll say is our website is migrationjustice.org. So if you're curious about the work we do or any of our programming, you can learn more about that at migrationjustice.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregory. I'd like to turn to Monica now. Monica, please tell us about Casa San Jose. It's an incredible organization that you've helped grow phenomenally since you started as the executive director in 2018. And tell us what's happening today. Give us sort of a lay of the land of what's happening with Latino immigrants in Pittsburgh.
Thank you, Susan. I was sharing earlier that Pittsburgh is considered a major city, but even though we're a major city, Latinos are still less than 3% of the population here. The immigrant population is actually very, very small. And despite that, ICE activity has increased over 250% since last year alone. And the tactics that they're using are much more harsh than they have been in the past. And so they're going to courthouses, they're going to ICE check-ins, they're going to restaurants, they're going to people's homes. I was just sharing with Susan yesterday, we saw a work van just sitting in the middle of the road in one of our neighborhoods here where the windows were all smashed out and the people were just gone. And that's an everyday occurrence. So again, we do have a smaller immigrant population here, but we're seeing a lot of increased enforcement. And it's scary because there was some talks about looking for a larger facility here in Pittsburgh. They're currently located on the south side. It's a very small facility, but they're looking for a larger space. And that makes me worry because there really aren't enough immigrants to even meet the quotas that they have now. So if they are looking for more space, who are they really going to go after? They're going to be going after people like you and I.
Thank you for that. And just a little bit more about Casa San Jose, because it's such a great origin. You do so much with Casa. Please tell us a little bit more.
Thank you, Susan. I got off track. Thank you for keeping me on track. Casa San Jose, we're a nonprofit organization. We provide an array of services. We have youth programming, mental health services, social services. We do a lot of advocacy. We were birthed out of the Sisters of St. Joseph, and if you guys know those nuns, they are like, they're a force. They're a force, right? And so we learn a lot from them, and in the beginning, we were a very strong social service agency, which we still are now, that we used to just like dabble in advocacy, but I'm really proud to say that we are very much doing equal work in both parts. We do have a rapid response network where when ICE is spotted somewhere, we are able to get people to get out there en masse fairly quickly. We do some accompaniments as well. We do court accompaniments, ICE check-in accompaniments, anything that people don't feel comfortable doing on their own. Right now, we are doing a lot of food deliveries because people are afraid to leave their house. There was a raid here that happened over 5 hours. It was a 5-hour long raid, and it was from 5 o'clock until 10 o'clock at night, and it was when people were coming home from work. So everybody that was driving while brown was pulled over by the police, and if they couldn't produce, I guess, what they thought was sufficient identification, then ICE would pick them up right on the spot. So things from like taking your kids to school, going to work, going to the grocery store are very dangerous, and people are afraid. And so we've been able to fill in the gaps and figure out what the needs of our community are, and really been able to step up and help them.
So this is a very helpful backdrop to know about your backgrounds and what your respective organization and centers focus on. I'll turn it now to you, Gregory. I'd love to understand more about, and I'm sure the audience here would like to understand a little bit more about your research and how it examines how data practices shape people's sense of belonging and agency. And so when AI systems collect data about people, especially immigrants or marginalized communities, what does that mean for their dignity? You've done a lot of work on the issue of dignity, right?
Yeah, so one thing I think that's helpful to start discussions like this about is how technology in general, when we say like a well-designed technology or UX, a lot of it involves burying the logics of the system kind of like below the surface and making for a very intuitive interaction so that you don't really notice what's happening under that hood. Like nobody wants to be bombarded with lots of questions as a consumer, right? And so if we think about taking that approach of kind of like, let's call it the Mac OS approach, right? You just have files, folders, and recycle bins, but you don't have to do command line prompts anymore to figure out what's actually happening with that data. When smart cities and smart homes start operating in this way, and at this particular moment, you're talking about a community that is not only being targeted, and I'm just saying migrants generally, because I don't want to even limit it just to quote unquote undocumented or what certain people would call illegal aliens, to speak of dehumanization and denying a certain kind of dignity. But this idea that anyone short of full citizen is potentially swept up in this what's going on right now, and to this point that we have a massive infrastructure being built up, that when we are not actively detaining people, we are, as taxpayers, paying just to keep those beds ready for more detentions. And so there is also just that real question of, if we deport everyone we're claiming to, who then goes into these detention centers? And so all of these things, I know I'm jumping around a bit, but when you are someone who is in that first wave of being kind of attacked or targeted or talked about, the feeling that the environment can turn on you at any point is very different than like, I have to look out for this person or that person. You really have to start thinking about the kinds of signals you're giving off at all times and in all places. You might not want to go grocery shopping anymore, so you need groceries delivered to you. You are applying for asylum. You are playing by the rules. You are trying hard, but you are now afraid to show up to your court hearing because that might lead to your abduction and deportation, right? So that kind of shock to human dignity, to say, even playing by the rules, doing what you're supposed to, doing everything you think is right, and this is still going to be the potential outcome because a supposed technology is identifying you as being out of place, even in a place you call your home or your school or your work, really challenges that idea of dignity. And one other thing I would add to this discussion about, like, why, especially if you are a community who is in harm's way, let's frame it that way, especially a migrant community, there's all kinds of things that AI can try out that they can't face blowback for, right? It's really hard to be sued by an undocumented immigrant for violating their supposed rights. And we have a very problematic history as a country here about using certain migrant communities to try out different things and let the mistakes happen where they may happen and then move on. So one thing to think about is the way we are training and using all kinds of AI technologies on a population that really can't consent, is not given any privacy rights, and doesn't have the ability to fight back through the court system the way most of us in this room might have. And then the final point I'll make, similarly about like AI and legal and human dignity, imagine you are in this country and you are applying for asylum because you are fleeing political violence, right? That you did not want to leave your home, you were forced to leave your home. And you came here, you played by the rules, you sought asylum properly, but your entire legal case is premised on showing how traumatized you've been, right? Tapping into the hardest information, very difficult experiences, and being able to talk about it quite fluently in a court of law in order to prove your ability to stay in this country. That's a very time-consuming project for a lawyer to do, right? Like to sit with a human being and hear about the trauma that they've experienced and try and formulate that into a legal case. It's a lot of time, a lot of work. That is not something an AI chatbot can do, right? It can provide legal information. It could even be very useful in helping someone defend themselves, right? Represent themselves in our court system. But trying to work out and externalize experienced trauma with an AI chatbot, I can't use dignity to define that kind of interaction, even though I understand that might be put in place with the best intentions, right? Like to help someone because it might be better than no lawyer, and yet that's a pretty undignified situation to put someone into.
Yeah. Well, as part of that question, I was going to ask, like, how do we use these systems to help create dignity? How to create more human flourishing amongst?
Thank you. It won't be so dystopian, my response. And it's a good reminder that that's where accompaniment comes in. So one thing I've been thinking of is, I would love a country in which we actually promise everyone legal representation, right? And maybe a lot of you would too, but we don't have those lawyers. Like we do not have the numbers to actually assign a lawyer to every person that's going through our legal system, especially if they are an immigrant. So even if the money materialized, we don't have the people to put into that situation. So it does open this door to, well, this might be an area in which AI could be very useful in providing kinds of support to people who are navigating a very complex legal system. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of problems with that, trying to deal with your trauma. But if accompaniment could be a new system that we start creating, like there is someone who has some legal understanding and is there with that person using this AI chatbot or using some kind of legal assistant, that's a slightly different dynamic. That's someone who might have certain kinds of skills to really hold your hand, and literally or like, metaphorically, and go through that process so that it's not compounding the alienation and the dehumanization that you're already feeling. It's not a perfect answer, but thinking about how when we create these new tools, a new practice has to go along with it that helps it integrate into the systems that already exist.
Thank you for that. And Monica, so from the vantage point of Casa San Jose, a faith-based and oriented nonprofit born out of the Catholic social justice tradition, how do you think faith informs the way Casa resists the dehumanization of these systems and technologies?
So Casa, I think, is a little bit unique. I'm going to talk about Catholics for a minute. I'm Catholic. I was born and raised. All my kids went to Catholic school, so please forgive if I insult anyone. But the Catholic Church has not been a supporter of any of this. So we just recently were able to meet with the bishop and, just start to get their thinking along the line. If you think about, like, the Lutherans, they were the first ones to step up. Like, there's so many folks that were like, this is wrong. We want to do something. And this is like years ago. Even our Jewish brothers and sisters were the first ones on the front lines to try and help us. And it's sad that the Catholic Church is just now starting to get on. But I will say, Sister Janice Vanderneck founded Casa San Jose, and Sister Janice still works there, and she is an amazing leader that doesn't take no for an answer. And learning from her, under her leadership, and the way that she is able to move people by the words that she is able to share because of her strong faith. That is what's helped Casa move. That right there. So it might not have come from like the Catholic Church as a whole, but for those of us that believe in those teachings, we know how to use them to help the people that we really care about. Because you can't turn your back on your neighbor. We're about welcoming the stranger, even though sometimes we're not getting the support that we need from the Catholic Church. But I think it is, I think of like, I get tired sometimes and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this. And I just look over and I see Sister Janice at like almost 80 years old and she's still pushing away. And I'm like, okay, I gotta keep going. But it's that burning faith inside of her. We have other sisters that work at Casa as well. And you see the passion. And just when you want to give up hope, it doesn't let you. And so I am moved by my Catholic faith to do this work. And I know I'm doing what God wants me to do. I really wish that the Catholic Church as a whole would probably be a little bit more on board. But I haven't really thought about answering that question. So Thank you. That was a good question.
And I'm so glad that you brought up Sister Janice, because if there's some audience members who don't know about Sister Janice, please look her up. She is a force of nature, a good force of nature. And I don't know if it was her or her and the sisters, but you should tell the audience about what she's done since the raids and what they do on Fridays here in Pittsburgh. And the way they've mobilized other faith-based communities, which has been just amazing.
So I don't think Sister Janice sleeps. I'll start with that. but the ICE office is here on the south side. It's just a few blocks down. And so every Friday, they have prayer vigil there. And they started, I think it was running from like 9:30 to 10:30. It was pretty early, 9 to 10:30. And now it's getting a little colder, so I think they want to move it a little bit later. But it's really important. So she's been able to get different congregations to sort of take over for the month. But it's still every Friday it happens. And one thing that's really beautiful about that is that when people are picked up, they are taken there. That's where they are. And I can't imagine how absolutely horrible that day must be for those people, because they don't know what's going to happen to them. But to hear people outside praying for them, I think gives them some hope. And so she's out there, cold, rain, heat. She's out there with a large group of people. And if you're ever not busy on a Friday morning, I highly encourage you to go down there as well.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I know we need to stay on the topic of AI and technologies and data mining on migrants. So this is for you, Gregory. I'll move back and forth here a little bit. How do AI surveillance systems, so used in housing, employment vetting, predictive policing, affect who feels welcome in a city, right? I mean, this is a little bit of a different question than the first one. And what does belonging look like in an age where movement and identity are constantly monitored?
No, it's a great, so one thing I've been trying to follow, because it was released last month. I talk loud, but not that loud. Okay, sorry about that. So one thing I've been following in the news the past couple of months, maybe some of you have, but the company Palantir. Right, I'm fascinated by this company. It's producing a lot of AI, a lot of data. I'm fascinated by the fact that it picked the name of an evil surveillance tool from Lord of the Rings. Like, it's really worth processing that the Palantir corrupts whoever uses it. So they consciously chose that as the name for their company. But why it relates to this discussion is they released a service called Immigration OS. Okay, and this is for DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. I think it was something like $60 million. There's a lot of money going into developing AI and algorithms for tracking, monitoring, and identifying people who are supposedly undocumented or are not here or should not be here in the country. So this is a tool that claims to pull together huge amounts of data, all the systems you mentioned, right, that have been put in place over the past 10 years or so, plus even things like digital doorbells, right? Whether it's Ring or whether it's an apartment building. All manner of data that is being aggregated is finding its way into these databases, into Immigration OS that Palantir has created. And we even have some evidence now that they are taking some of this data from police departments who are not voluntarily giving it. It's just being taken, and that does not appear to be stopped at the moment. So there's massive aggregation of this data in order to create this system that's supposedly going to track, they claim it will follow every immigrant every single day and try to kind of root them out of society should they do anything wrong. And so it really, I don't want to be too hyperbolic, but it is the beginning of a possible digital apartheid where you can start using digital systems to just screen people out of certain parts of everyday life. They might live among you. It might not be physically segregated like it was in the 20th century, but the opportunities you have, the things you can dream about, the places you have access to, that's starting to shape. At least that's what these tools are aiming to do, these specific tools anyways. I'm not trying to claim that's all of AI. And this is feeding this idea of an everywhere border, right? Increasing concept that, like, people are increasingly applying for asylum before they even get to the border. That's what the CBP-1 app that came out during the Biden administration was all about. People had to wait until they were within so many miles of the southern border and then file an asylum application on a phone, and then when approved, after sometimes many months, then come to your check-in point at the border and come in. Those people are now being actively deported. Their use of that app has now made them easier to deport, even though they followed the rules. Tens of thousands of people were just cut off after waiting for months for an application. But that's one way in which the border has moved south, east, west, and north, like outside of the country, that you start encountering the border in different digital ways before you physically cross it. But then once you get into the country, that monitoring still continues. Practices that were common among Border Patrol right around the southern border are now practiced by ICE in our inner cities. Places like New York City, but same with Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Seattle. All of these cities are border cities. They're all within 100 miles of an east, west, north, or southern border, and that creates a different legal landscape under DHS about what can and can't be done. So all of this speaking to, if you are a migrant living within 100 miles of a border, dealing with an everywhere border that is very much getting into your personal life and arguably getting worse every month, because again, Immigration OS only came online last month. It is just getting started. So we're just starting to see where this could be going. It really raises these questions of belonging, and I also find it incredibly problematic that a lot of the rhetoric to rationalize this uses a framework that Tressie Cottom has called exclusion via inclusion, right? So this idea of it's keeping us all safe, it's making us all good, this is going to be good for you, this is the right way to do asylum, and actually that presumable process of inclusion is actively excluding these people, right? So like a language of here's how you belong, and then using that to exclude someone is just very kind of problematic. And so I mean, I will get in a bit more. I do have positive examples about how people are getting around this, but for the moment, I think it's worth understanding that this 20th century notion of physical borders being the primary thing that polices who gets in and who gets out, for better or for worse, has really exploded, and in all kinds of directions. And a lot of that is done through AI and algorithms, because you really can't fund the personnel, like the labor force necessary to do that kind of policing externally and internally, even with all the hiring we're doing with ICE right now. Like, it's barely scratching the surface, which is why they need these kinds of AI tools or algorithms to fill in those gaps.
Right, and increasing their spaces, and yeah. Monica, you're hearing this, and I'm curious, you know, you talked about how people are afraid to even go out and buy food, right? And go into spaces. On that topic, how do you see the fears around surveillance and data collection? How are they affecting people's day-to-day lives in wanting to help or report abuse or simply move through public space?
Yeah, so. Okay. Sort of going off of what you were saying, these things don't actually make us more safe, they make us less safe. So let's say, for example, Susan, I live next door to you, and I'm out of status for whatever reason. And I'm at home, and I see somebody coming in and setting your house on fire. I'm not going to feel comfortable calling the fire department. I'm not going to feel comfortable telling the police what I saw when they get there. And so that's making our community that we live in actually less safe. So we have a hard time getting people to file police reports when they've been victims of crimes. We had a woman attempting to get a PFA, a protection from abuse order, one day, and she went down to the magistrate's office, and the woman working there said, "You know, I can call ICE on you. I don't know what you're doing here." And she had to go back home to that abuser. So does that make her more safe or less safe? Right, so it's terrifying to me. It's something that's been happening, because even when people have to do their ICE check-ins, many times they're on a monitor, or just the cell phone themselves that they get from ICE has a tracking system. So they're already being tracked in ways that they shouldn't be. But now thinking about how much more tracking is going to happen, and I don't know, like, do I look like somebody who wasn't born here? I do. What does that mean?
Right.
Yeah.
A lot to think about there. Okay, Gregory, continuing on with surveillance and systems, how many faith communities provide sanctuary? I mean, we're talking to a faith-based community here. How many communities provide sanctuary or mutual aid? Or many of them do provide sanctuary or mutual aid. How might these communities respond to data-driven systems that track this movement that we're talking about, association and service use?
So this is what I consider the fun stuff, like actually starting to learn a bit how people on the ground in their own way are doing something productive to help other people. I will say I don't have any concrete example of an organization or like a shelter using AI, but lots of technologies to circumvent AI. Like, that's a lot of what I'm seeing right now. And I think that's just a capacity of what can you do internally. If you're trying to like feed people, you can't create an LLM with the exact same staff. Like, that, it's a different dynamic. But so one thing I've been trying to synthesize are, what are design values for what we might think of as digital accompaniment? Like, how do you bear witness and be with someone in a digital society and organize those interactions, not just the technology, but the whole interaction being designed to live up to these ideals of accompaniment, which itself has a very rich religious history. Not exclusive, it can be totally non-religious, but you know, liberation theology has a lot of space for accompaniment. The Catholic Church does a lot of accompaniment work. And so of these design values, the 5 that I've seen the most, and I'll give you some examples of them after naming them. One is an idea of hospitality. Right? Like, actually using technology and trying to make someone feel welcome, especially a community who is often tasked with making the rest of us feel welcome, right? So like taking the hospitality industry and taking the industry out of it and actually saying like, we're just gonna try to figure out a way to make you feel comfortable right now. A concrete example of that is I was in the desert of Arizona at a part where the wall breaks down, right? There was no physical wall because if any of you are familiar with the geography of Arizona, it's really hard to build a wall in something that's a desert most of the year and then has a monsoon season that just rips the wall out of the ground. That's its own issue. But there are pockets, and where there were pockets, that is where people would often cross by foot, and having touched soil, they have the right to declare asylum as long as they quote unquote turn themselves into Border Patrol. So people were crossing the border in the desert with the goal of seeking asylum, turning themselves into Border Patrol. But Border Patrol doesn't have a capacity for sheltering people. And they don't have a lot of interest in sheltering people. They don't see that as part of their mission. So it created this weird thing where people were pooling up for a couple of days in the desert, waiting for Border Patrol to come pick them up, and creating this humanitarian crisis. So the Tucson Samaritans and a lot of other volunteer groups affiliated with a number of religious organizations down there started setting up a camp just to be with them for the 1 to 3 days in which they might be waiting out in the desert, food, clothing, toys for the children. I saw at least 13 children on the one day I was there. These were things that was basic accompaniment, but they also brought satellite Wi-Fi, right? So they had chargers for phones, and they had satellite Wi-Fi. And the reason being, people that were coming over the border, their phones were dead, and being able to charge a phone, and they all had phones, and call a loved one and say, I'm alive, I made it, and then call your sponsor and say, I'm on my way, I'm coming, and seeing the tears come down from their face, that is a kind of accompaniment that was just powerful to see, and that is now an essential service, just like providing food, water, and first aid, that kind of digital assistance. Another one is placement, like taking into account in this very detailed understanding of different shelters of where is the person in the process? Are they applying for asylum? If they're applying for asylum, certain levels of visibility might be to their advantage. It's really horrible, but to get to what I was saying earlier, being able to document trauma, being able to document blowback, that can be very helpful in your court case. So this idea of understanding, is this person needing to hide right now? Or do they need a certain degree of exposure right now to help their system? These are calculations that are being made in trying to figure out how you can leverage technology to do that. Another one is this idea of mutuality, just making sure that the power dynamics are consistent. So not trying to push a technology onto someone else, like making sure that that is some mutually understood and agreed upon technology. So I've seen like a real movement away from WhatsApp, which understandably was like the cornerstone of messaging just because most people knew how to use that, right? So if migrants coming into your shelter knowing WhatsApp, makes sense to do a WhatsApp group. But switching to Signal, which is not only more encrypted, but is not a for-profit corporation owned by Meta, is a much better option for kinds of communications that you don't want swept up into these immigration OS things. And then finally, this idea of discretion as a design value. This I saw the most shifting in January was when not to collect data and what data not to ask for because it's not safe to put into any database, right? There are essential things you might need to provide support and you need that information. Anything else, don't aggregate. Like, and this is not new. Queer communities, lots of communities have operated on the DL for a very long time and figured out ways of talking in code and ensuring that not every piece of data is asked for and aggregated. And it's been interesting to see this really grow and understanding that there are things you don't want to put into certain technological systems because at the moment, chances are it will harm this person rather than help them. And so even though those are all reactive, I can even go on about like how they put in their own CCTV systems in shelters that they control themselves, the use of various cash apps and fintech to create kinds of payments for undocumented youth who can't get paid with a normal paycheck. And these are really small things, but they help people feel human, like that they fit into society. And it's been fascinating to see that adapt in real time in very different locations.
Yeah, I've become familiar with Signal, and a lot of my friends in the Latino community now want to communicate that way solely as opposed to texting or WhatsApp. So that's been an interesting
And just
dynamic.
to hype Signal a bit more, because what I tell these organizations, it's not just the encryption end-to-end, which is very similar. I think it's the same kind of encryption that WhatsApp uses. But WhatsApp monetizes all the metadata around that, right? And that's what's potentially challenging for a migrant is that knowing where you are and who you're talking to, that's easy to get through WhatsApp. Signal is a 501c3, so it has no incentive to store and monetize the metadata. And that's part of what makes it so safe,
Yeah.
is not just the technical encryption, but the political orientation of the organization itself.
Yep. Oh, deep breath. Monica, from a policy standpoint, for policymakers in the room here who want to prioritize, if policymakers want to prioritize one concrete step to protect immigrant rights in the age of AI, what would you tell them to do?
Just because things are changing so rapidly, like, maybe a week ago, the answer would have been different. But I think what's really important is if you're in a position of power that can change things for communities that are marginalized or under attack, please talk to the communities that you want to see these changes for. Because things change. Every week there's something different. And we've been working on, this anti-masking bill and the driver's license. There's like bills that we've been trying to push forward for quite some time, but things change. And honestly, there are some really well-meaning people in the world, and I thank you all. And I ask you to just be in communication with us, myself. There's other organizations here that work locally with immigrant groups. There's a collaborative called the CII, the Collaborative for Immigrant. I forgot. We just had a meeting all day this morning, so my brain is on fire. I forgot. But anyway, they're a great group. But we're 18 immigrant and refugee serving organizations coming together to help one another. And so what might work for the Latino community might not work for, the Bhutanese community. But just really working with us, because you all have the attention and can get into rooms that we can't. And so we really are heavily relying on you all today.
Yeah, and I will say, here in Pittsburgh, the immigrant community is very well organized. There are nonprofits that really have, like Casa, of course, that has this real grassroots understanding of what the community is enduring. And then, like you said, the Bhutanese, pretty much every cultural group I feel here has an organization, and they're pretty well organized. So it's very easy to access any immigrant group here, pretty much, whether it's through their own cultural organizations or even the refugee and immigrant outreach, like Jewish Family and Community Center, and my goodness, I'm forgetting some of them.
There's so many. There's like a Rise. There's
yes.
Hello Neighbor.
Yes.
There's a bunch of us.
Yeah.
So